Hey everyone, welcome back to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men, the show where we dive deep into the real, honest conversation about men's mental health, identity, and healing. I'm your host, Austin, and I'm really glad you're here with me today. Whether you're turning in for the first time or you've been riding with us for a while, I want to thank you for showing up, not just for the podcast, but for yourself. Today, we're tackling something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not: the media. I'm talking about the movies we grew up on, the shows we binge, the ads we see every day, even the music we listen to. All of it carries messages, subtle and not so subtle, about what it means to be a man. The episode is called Media and Masculinity: How Stereotypes Affect Mental Health. And we're going to take a closer look at how the media shapes our understanding of masculinity, and more importantly, how that impacts the way we see ourselves and how we handle emotions, relationships, and pressure. You'll probably notice the patterns: strong, silent type, the tough guy who never cries, the action hero who solves problems with violence, or the guy who's only valued for his status, wealth, or physical strength. These images get repeated so often that they start to feel normal, even expected. But here's the thing: when the media keeps feeding us these narrow definitions of manhood, it leaves us very little room for real men, like you, like me, to exist in our full humanity. So, in this episode, we're going to break down where these messages come from, how they show up in our day to day lives, and most importantly, how we can start to challenge them, how we can rewrite the story, not just for ourselves, but for the next generation of men coming up behind us. Because healing doesn't just happen in private, it happens in culture, in community, and in conversation. So let's start with a simple but powerful question: what does it mean to be a man, according to the media? Seriously, take a second and sit with that. When you think about the media, movies, commercials, video games, sports, commentary, music videos, what kind of men are we usually shown? What qualities are highlighted? What stories are told about what it means to be a real man? More often than not, the answer looks like this: he's strong, he's silent, he's physically dominant, he's successful, not just personally, but in a way that's visible and measurable. He's confident, maybe even cocky. He doesn't show vulnerability, he keeps these emotions in checks and locked down. He solves problems with action, often through force. We're talking about the characters like James Bond, John Wick, Tony Stark. On the surface, they're powerful, smart, and in control. The kind of guys other men are told they should want to be. They're stylish, fearless, and don't waste time taking and talking about feelings. They're cool under pressure, and when things go wrong, they just handle it, usually alone. Even in stuff made for kids, these patterns show up. Think about cartoons or superhero shows. The hero is usually the strong, stoic one, the guy who keeps his emotions in check and wins through sheer willpower or strength. Meanwhile, the more emotional or expressive characters are often the villains, the sidekicks, or the comic relief. They're not the ones kids are told to admire. Now, let's be clear: these characters aren't bad. A guy like Tony Stark is complex. He's witty, intelligent, and yeah, he's got moments of vulnerability too. Same with John Wick or James Bond. They're compelling for a reason, but the problem isn't that they exist. The problem is when these are the only types of masculinity we constantly see. Because over time, the repetition becomes a blueprint. It tells us without needing to say it outright, this is who you're supposed to be. And if you don't fit into that mold, if you're sensitive, quiet, unsure of yourself, emotionally expressive, or just interested in being dominant or aggressive, then something must be wrong with you. Or at least that's the message that gets absorbed. Let me ask you, growing up, how often did you see a man cry in a movie or a TV show without it being used for a joke or to show weakness? How often did you see a man choose vulnerability over violence and have the choice celebrated instead of being mocked? How often was the guy who talked through his problems seen as strong instead of soft? These messages matter, especially when we're young, because when we're all looking for role models, examples of what it means to be an adult, what it means to be a man, what it means to be you. And if all examples we're given are based on performance, toughness, and emotional suppression, it becomes really hard to feel like you have permission to just be human. And this stuff doesn't stay on the screen. It leaks into how we move through the world. It shows up in how we relate to others, our partners, our kids, our friends. It shows up in how we deal with stress, with failure, with grief. It shapes how we see ourselves when we're not winning, when we're hurting, or when we need help. Because if we're only, and we've only ever been taught that, real men don't show weakness, then when we inevitably do feel weak, when we're struggling mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we don't feel like we have a place to go. We bottle it up, we stay quiet, we pretend we're fine, and that silence becomes a cage. And that's the real cost of stereotypes, not just for the pressures to perform or confirm, but the isolation that comes with it. The inability to fully express who we are, not just the tough parts, but the tender ones too. So, again, I'm not saying we need to erase all the actions heroes or stop watching movies where the guy kicks down doors and saves the day. What I'm saying is we need to be more balanced, more variety, more room for different kinds of masculinity to be seen, respected, and valued. Because being a man isn't just about being strong, it's about being whole. And that means making space for a full range of human emotions, strength and softness, courage and vulnerability, action and reflection. So here's something to think about. What kind of male characters did you look up to growing up? What did they teach you, directly or indirectly, about who you were supposed to be? And maybe more importantly, what parts of yourself did you learn to hide just to try to fit in? These are the conversations that matter, and we're just getting started. Let's talk about where masculinity stereotypes actually come from, because they don't just appear out of nowhere. They're part of a much bigger system, a system we're born into, raised in, and often unconsciously shaped by. From the time we're kids, the messages start rolling in. Think back to the toys we're handed as little boys: trucks, swords, action figures, all built around ideas of strength, control, toughness, even violence. And look at that contrast. Girls get toys about nature, nurturing, communication, imagination, like dolls or pretend kitchens. That alone starts to plant early seeds of this is what boys do and this is what girls do. Even the cartoons we watch reinforced it. The boy characters were usually brave, stoic, impulsive, and they often had to fight to solve problems. Crying was either a joke or a weakness. You never saw a male character sit down and talk about his feelings unless it was to be part of a punchline. and marketing. Oh man. So many ads were like, real boys play rough or don't be a crybaby. Those messages shape how we see ourselves before we even know we're being shaped. Now, fast forward to adolescence, the confusing, intense time when we're figuring out who we are and how we fit in. This is when those early seeds really start to grow. Action movies become our blueprint for what it means to be a man. You've got guys like Jason Bourne, Vin Diesel, or even older school heroes like Rambo. They don't talk, they don't ask for help. They act, they dominate, they win, and they get the girl win while barely crackling a smile. In school, there's also the locker room culture. Maybe you've experienced this where emotional expression gets mocked and toughness is the only thing that earns respect. It's all about competition, dominance, and never showing weakness, especially not emotional weakness. Then there's music. A lot of messages in certain genres, especially mainstream hip hop or rock, have long reinforced the idea that being a man means being in control, having status, not needing anyone, and definitely not showing vulnerability. That's where shame starts to build. Shame around feeling too much, being too sensitive, or not fitting in to the narrow mold. Then we become adults, and the stereotypes just evolve. Now the pressure shows up in new forms. You're expected to have your career figured out, be successful, be the provider, be the rock in your relationships. Suppress stress. Don't complain, just grind, push through, and take care of everything and everyone around you. There's often no space to say, I'm struggling. And if you do, there's this feel and fear, real or imagined, that it'll make you look weak, unstable, or less of a man. Even in romantic relationship, there's subtle expectations to be emotionally available, but not too emotional. Vulnerability is often appreciated in theory, but if you show too much of it, it can get uncomfortable fast for both you and your partner. That's a tightrope walk. And it's not just storytelling, it's backed up by studies. According to a study done in 2022, 75% of men said they felt pressure to be emotionally stoic, and media was one of the top three influences on that feeling. That's a huge number, and it shows this isn't just a theory, it's a shared experience, the kind we don't always talk about, but nearly all of us feel. For me, I can definitely think of a time where I felt boxed in by that image of what a man should be. I remember watching shows or movies where the lead guy never flinched, never cried, and never doubted himself. And me thinking, that's what a man and what I have to be. Anything else is weak. But over time, especially as I started struggling with my own mental health, I realized that trying to live up to that image wasn't just exhausting, it was dangerous. It kept me from opening up. It made me isolate myself when I really needed help. And honestly, it made my relationships suffer because I wasn't being real with the people closest to me. The truth is, nobody can thrive under the weight of a stereotype. We all need space to be fully human, not just perform a role. So, what do we do? Well, the first step is awareness. Recognizing that these ideas, these stereotypes we planted, they're not truth, they're stories. And stories can be rewritten. The second step, start to ask yourself, what kind of man do I want to be? Not the one the media tells me to be, not the one that performs for approval, but the one that is grounded, emotionally honest, and free to be whole. Because when we break away from that mold, we don't just heal ourselves, we give other men permission to do the same. So, what does all this actually do to our mental health? We've talked about how the media shapes our view of masculinity, the strong, silent, emotional, shut down man. The problem isn't just that the version of manhood is narrow, it's that it comes with real consequences for all of us, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So let's break down a few of the major ones. From a young age, boys are often taught directly or indirectly that emotions are dangerous, that crying is a weak thing to do, that being too happy, too sad, too afraid, too anything is something to be ashamed of. We hear things like man up, don't be a baby, stop crying before I give you something to cry about. And while those words might seem small in a moment, they stack up. Over time, they teach us to push our emotional and emotions down, to disconnect from them, to avoid vulnerability at all costs. But emotions don't just disappear. When we ignore them, they build up. They come out sideways, often in ways that are harmful to ourselves and to others, which leads us to the next point. If vulnerability isn't manly, then where does that leave us when we're struggling, when we're heartbroken, when we're grieving, when life feels too heavy to carry? If we've been taught that talking about our feelings makes us less of a man, we shut down, we isolate, we go quiet, and we convince ourselves that no one would understand, or worse, that no one should have to carry our mess. So instead of reaching out, we then pull away. We don't call our friends, we lie and say we're fine. We pretend we've got it all together, and in the process, we cut ourselves off from the very things we need most: connection. Loneliness among men is a silent epidemic. Studies show that men are significantly less likely to have close friendships or emotional support systems compared to women, especially after the age of 30. Many men report not having a single person they feel comfortable being fully honest with. And that's heartbreaking because we're human. We are wired for connection. But media and the culture it shapes often tells us that the connection equals weakness, that admitting we're not okay is somehow a failure. Here's something interesting, and maybe something you've seen in your own life or lives of people around you. When all our emotions are labeled off limits, anger becomes the only acceptable one. We're not allowed to be sad, afraid, anxious. But anger is fine. Anger is masculine. Anger shows strength. So what happens? Everything gets funneled through that one channel. Stress turns into irritability. Sadness turns into rage. Hurt becomes defensiveness. And because we've never been taught how to process emotions in a healthy way, we either explode or we implode. This can show up in our relationships, snapping at our partners, yelling at our kids, picking fights over small things, or it turns inward, numbing out, drinking, shutting down completely. But underneath all that anger, there's usually something tender, something unspoken, a need, a wound, a fear. And we need to learn how to name those things if we ever want to heal. This one doesn't just get talked about enough. The media doesn't just show us who we're supposed to be, it shows us even what we're supposed to look like, too. Think about it. Most leading men in movies or ads look a certain way: tall, lean, muscular, and symmetrical. They've got six packs, square jaws, and not an ounce of body fat in sight. That creates an ideal that feels impossible. for the average guy to live up to, especially without extreme diets, workouts, or even surgery. But no one talks about the pressure men feel around body image because, again, we're supposed to be above that. We're supposed to be confident no matter what. But we're not immune. Body dysmorphia, eating disorders, steroid abuse, these affect men too. And because there's so much stigma around admitting it, most guys suffer in silence. According to recent studies, nearly 1 in 4 men say they feel unhappy with their bodies. And over 85% of teenager boys say they feel pressure to have a perfect physique based on what they see in media. That's real, that's harmful, and that's something we need to start acknowledging. Now, let's look at the bigger picture for a moment because all of those consequences add up. When men are taught to suppress their emotions, avoid vulnerability, isolate themselves, and feel like they don't measure up physically or emotionally, it takes a toll. Men are statistically less likely to seek therapy or mental health support. They're less likely to talk to friends or loved ones when they're going through something hard. And yet, suicide rates are significantly higher among men. In fact, men die by suicide almost 4 times more than often than women. And in cultures where traditional, rigid masculinity is still enforced, those numbers are even higher. Let that sink in. We're not just about discomfort here. We're talking about a public health crisis, a crisis rooted in silence, shame, and unrealistic expectation of what it means to be a man. And there's something I want you to really hear. The opposite of masculinity isn't femininity, it's vulnerability. And that's something media rarely allows us to explore. That's a quote I've come back to over and over again, and it's something I remind myself of often. Because vulnerability isn't weakness, it's a courage. It takes real strength to be honest about what you feel, what you need, and who you are. And that's what we need more of, not just in our personal lives, but in the stories we tell, the shows we watch, the characters we admire. We need to see men who cry, men who ask for help, men who choose connection over control. Because when we make room for that, we create space for real hearing. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you gave yourself permission to feel something without judgment? So let's talk about breaking that cycle because we've spent a lot of time in this episode unpacking where masculine stereotypes come from, how they affect us, and how deeply they've woven into our media and our upbringing and our relationships and identities. But awareness alone isn't enough. The real question is, what can we do? How do we break the cycle and build something healthier for ourselves, for each other, and for the next generation to come? It starts with recognizing the pattern. A lot of us grew up thinking that the way we felt, our struggles, our doubts, our emotions were something wrong or unmanly. But now we know those patterns aren't truth. They're conditioning. Once you start seeing who those old messages show up and where they show up in the way you talk to yourself, the way you respond to others, the way you suppress your own needs, you gain power. You can't change what you're not aware of, but once you're aware, you can choose differently. Next comes rewriting the narrative. This means actively challenging the outdated story that says real men don't cry, or men are only vulnerable if they provide, or vulnerability is weakness. Those stories were built to keep us in line, not to help us thrive. You can start rewriting those stories in your everyday life, and it doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. When you check in with a friend and ask how they are really doing, you're breaking the cycle. When you admit that you're feeling anxious or sad or overwhelmed, even just to yourself, you're breaking the cycle. When you show up to your kids and your partner that it's okay to feel things deeply and talk about them, you're modeling a whole new definition of strength. Let's be real. Doing this alone is hard. That's why finding community is crucial. And I don't mean just hanging out with people, I mean finding people who are also doing this work. People who can hold space for your vulnerability. People who challenge you, support you, and reflect back your growth. Whether that's a therapist, a men's group, a close friend, or even conversations like this podcast. Find your people. We weren't meant to do this alone. Healing and growth happens in relationships. Now on to the fourth step. If we want to break that cycle for good, we have to model something new. And that doesn't mean getting it all perfect. It just means showing up as our real selves. When other men, especially younger ones, see us being honest, see us admitting when we're struggling, or hear us talking about our emotional lives without shame, that creates a ripple effect. Because a lot of people haven't seen that before. They've only seen the mask, not the human underneath. But the moment someone sees you showing up with authenticity, they start to believe it's possible for them too. This part's huge, especially if you're a parent, a mentor, an uncle, a coach, a teacher, or just someone who younger boys look up to. You have a massive opportunity to shape what masculinity looks like for the next generation. That means creating safe space for emotions, letting boys cry without shaming them, encouraging empathy, listening, and emotional intelligence just as much as we encourage strength and courage. It means expanding the definition of manhood instead of narrowing it. Because if we can raise emotionally healthy boys, we won't have to fix so many broken men later. Step 6 is being kind to yourself while you unlearn. This work isn't always easy. You'll catch yourself falling back into old patterns. You might still feel uncomfortable being vulnerable. That's okay. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you are human. So you give yourself some grace. Unlearning decades of conditioning takes time. Every small step counts. Every honest conversation matters. Every time you choose to feel instead of numb, to connect instead of isolate, to ask instead of assume, you're doing the work, you're breaking the cycle. And you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for your friends, your family, your sons, your younger self. So, what can we do? What can we wake up to the story? We can challenge it. We can rewrite it together. And we can rebuild a version of masculinity that actually supports mental health, emotional depth, real connection, and true strength. Because being a man isn't about how much you hold in, it's about how willing you are to show up fully. And when we do that honestly, consistently, imperfectly, that's how we break the cycle. So with that being said, masculinity isn't a box, it's a spectrum. Let that sink in for a second. We've spent decades being told there's only one right way to be a man, that you've got to be tough, unemotional, in control, always confident, always put together. But the truth is, masculinity is so much bigger than that. It's actually and not set of a rigid rules. It's not performance. It's not a checklist. It's a spectrum. And we each get to decide where we stand on that spectrum. You can be strong and sensitive. You can be a protector and ask for protection. You can be assertive and gentle. Masculinity doesn't have to cancel out other parts of who you are. It can include them. There's power in that. There's freedom in that. See, the media may have planted some seeds. It may have shaped some of the beliefs we carry. Some of us grew up thinking we had to act a certain way to be accepted, to be loved, to be man enough, and that is not our fault. We picked up those messages. They're everywhere. But now that we're aware of them, we get to choose what grows. We have the power to uproot the things that no longer serve us. We have the power to redefine manhood in a way that actually supports our mental health, our relationships, and our sense of self. And that's what this space is about. Not perfection, not performance, but progress. Honest progress. So thank you, seriously, for hanging out with me today. If anything in this episode sparked something for you, if it made you think differently or just made you feel seen, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs it. A friend, a brother, a partner, anyone who's trying to figure this stuff out, just like we are. You can also leave a review. That helps this message reach more people, or hit me up directly. Whether you want to share your story, ask a question, or just say what's on your mind. And here's what I want to leave you with. Keep showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. Keep being honest with yourself and with the people around you. And most of all, stay curious about who you are, about who you want to become, about the version of masculinity that feels most true to you. This work isn't always easy, but it's worth it. Until next time, stay honest, stay curious, and keep showing up.